Good morning. This is Sister Nella Sammons from Tornado Apostolic Church. Welcome to our morning devotion. Mine is entitled, The Valley is a Temporary Place, Part 1. I want to read from Psalms chapter 23, one of my favorites, 1 through 6. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemy. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There is one thing that we all can be sure of. God is always at work. When we are at some crossroad in our lives, when we are forced to face the trials and tribulations of life, when you are at the point of not knowing what to do, you can always trust in God, because he sure knows what to do. Every one of us go through valley experiences in our lives. In fact, these valleys experiences are a part of life. Every time we go through the valley experiences, we tend to wonder why God allows us to go through them. In the chapter that I just read in Psalms 23, David is speaking of a deep, dark valley where there seems to be no ray of light, and you feel like you are not going to make it. But valleys are not dead-end streets, and the disappointments, frustrations, discouragements, and dilemmas of life, although they are valleys, shouldn't be classified as a disaster. David even refers to them as a shadow. Nonetheless, I submit to you that the valley is the only route to our own personal promised land. There is no alternate route. When the Egyptians chased the Israelites to the Red Sea, there was no way for them to go around it, but God made a way for them to cross. When we journey through the valley, we must always keep in mind that God will make a way. We must always keep in mind that his grace, his leading, and his mercy will never fail. His way may not always be the same as the one we would have imagined. In other words, he may do the opposite of what we expect him to do. And sometimes we have acquired the habit of trying to tell the Lord exactly how we want him to help us, and ignore the fact that he knows just what to do. When we are journeying through the valley, we sometimes tend to question God's timing. I know this because I am guilty of it myself. I don't know how often I've moaned the words, Lord, why won't you help me? But I was overlooking the fact that all I have to do is trust him and stop holding on to the thought, or better yet, fear, that God will wait too long to do something. David here, the writer of this beautiful psalm, takes a personal and a possessive view of what God means to him. He does something that we all should do in respect of God and who he is. David says, the Lord is my shepherd. He was not debating whether or not he was someone else's shepherd, but when it came to his relationship with God, it was a personal endeavor. The Lord is my shepherd. When it comes to our relationship with God, we should all feel this way. I would never question whether or not he's yours, but I know for a fact that he's mine. David knew firsthand the duty of a shepherd because he was a shepherd himself. He faced the lion and the bear to protect his father's sheep. He reasoned that God was his protector. Just like David had placed his life between the beast and the sheep, Jesus Christ placed his life between Satan and you and me. David was journeying through the valley, but he didn't make the valley his permanent home. I believe that from the beginning, David's trust in God told him that the valley was just a temporary place. there is a question that all of us must answer. The question is, where do you do most of your living? Do you live on the mountain or in the valley? That's what David is doing here in Psalms 23. Although the valley of the shadow of death is a physical location, it is also another name for the road between Jerusalem and Jericho, where the Good Samaritan helped the man along the way. It was a winding road that was very steep, and shepherds had to take their flocks through it on their way to the fields. People would hide in the caves to steal the lambs to eat, so David wrote the entire 23rd Psalms with this in mind. Where do you do most of your living? This is a question that only you and God himself can answer. It is either on the mountaintop or in the valley. Let me remind you that when the Bible speaks of mountains, the mountain is normally considered a place of revelation and awe. To have a mountaintop experience means you have received some insight and some inspiration. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy because all your bills are paid, or that you have very little worries, because if that were true, then there are a lot of unbelievers who are always on the mountaintop. The mountaintop for a Christian is where we meet God and we can see the promised land. We all love being on the mountaintop, a place where we can feel God's presence, a place where we can clearly hear God's voice, and we're able to follow his leading, because it is clear to us that the valley is quite a bit different. The valleys where we are struggling. The average Christian experiences both the mountaintop and the valley. We do so because life is filled with ups and downs. The truth is, if you're like me, most of the time you live your life in the valley. The valley is very different than the mountaintop. The valley is where life becomes challenging. The valley where many battles are fought and where feelings are hurt and attitudes are developed. The valley is the place in life where we struggle every day with fears and our hopes and painful circumstances. The valley for us is inevitable because we find ourselves there for various reasons. It may be spiritual warfare, or the actions of others, or because of our own rebellious actions, or even due to the hand of God himself. We will find ourselves in the valley. On the mountaintop is where we come to meet God, but the valley is where God comes to meet us. God will meet you in the valley. As we struggle during our time in the valley, David reassures you and me that we can make it through. Just remember that after every mountaintop experience, there is a valley. You're either going into one, coming out of one, or in the midst of a valley. Jesus made this very clear to us. In their world you shall have tribulations, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. You will have many trials and sorrows. There will be people who will misunderstand you. They will criticize you, talk evil about you, and judge you unfairly in the valley. Again, the bad news is you will have to go through the valley. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. All you have to do is to count the sunsets, and you will experience some valleys because they are a normal part of life. You can't plan them, you can't time them, and you cannot schedule them. And they usually come at the worst possible time. They usually come when you don't have time, when you are unprepared and you feel as if you just don't have the resources to deal with them. Valleys are like that. They just happen. A valley can come upon you all of a sudden without a warning. It doesn't matter how good you've been, how careful you've been. Life is such that those old valleys will come just the same. And valleys are impartial. They are not selective. They come to the rich and they come to the poor, men and women, black or white. No one is exempt from valleys. David, in his classic song, is telling us something. Here is utilizing the word through. It appears that he is saying that anything you walk or go through has a beginning and an ending. He realized that while we're in the valley, through our faith, God would meet us there. That is the end of part 1. And tomorrow I will go into the valley as a temporary place, part 2. God bless your day.